Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that's loud, chaotic, and woven together by history and human ambition. Welcome to ancient Rome, where being a teenager wasn't a phase. It was a full-blown performance, played out under the scrutiny of gods, neighbors, and an entire city that never knew silence. Before you settle in, if you find yourself enjoying this strange trip through time, feel free to stick around and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Because something tells me Rome would have loved to know your coordinates. Now imagine this. You're 13 years old. In the modern world, that might mean homework, awkward friendships, and questionable fashion choices. But in Rome, 13 meant you were stepping into adulthood, not gradually, but like a soldier being shoved into battle before he finished breakfast. There was no easing into responsibility here. You woke up not to the gentle light of dawn or the comforting smell of pancakes, but to the full-volume mayhem of a Roman morning. The first sound to reach your ears? Your neighbor screaming at his mule, which had decided to argue back in brays and hoof stomps on uneven cobblestone. You're not even conscious yet, but the city is already operating at full drama. If you're lucky and wealthy, you wake in a villa adorned with mosaics that sparkle when the sun hits them just right. But beauty comes at a cost. The open design, elegant and airy, is a wind tunnel in disguise. Cold air whooshes through like it's got an appointment to ruin your morning, and the delicate mosaics underfoot do nothing to soften the chill. A servant, with the dead-eyed politeness of someone who gave up personal ambitions years ago, leans in and murmurs that it's time to rise. What they mean, of course, is get up before the rooster screams like it's being murdered for the 5th time this week. But if your family is poor, your morning doesn't include art or whispers. You wake on a bed of straw crammed next to more siblings than you can count before coffee, except, of course, there's no coffee. Just the warm breath of your brother who's rolled onto your face because space is a luxury you've never met. The noise outside is no less aggressive. Someone's already shouting about bread prices. Dogs are barking at nothing and everything, and your other neighbor is having a loud argument with a pigeon. The sun isn't even up, but Rome doesn't care. It's been awake since the Republic was born, and it's not slowing down for you. Then there's the smell. Rome greets your nostrils with a blend of ambition and questionable hygiene. Olive oil, incense, bread baking somewhere far away, sweat, smoke, and the mysterious contents of a chamber pot flung from the window above yours during the night. Privacy is a myth. Peace? She packed her bags and left the empire years ago. You swing your legs over the side of your bedding, whether it's tiled mosaic or packed dirt, and feel the morning chill bite at your feet like a personal insult. Every step toward your tunic involves navigating a minefield of baskets, clay jugs, stray sandals, your father's tools, and a cat that may or may not belong to anyone but definitely considers itself divine. Outside, Rome decides you've had enough quiet and turns the volume up even further. Vendors are already performing their morning sales opera, yelling about grapes that haven't been fresh in a week and fish that never stood a chance. Bakers shout with the intensity of men launching a Senate campaign, boasting about loaves of bread like they're monuments. Street kids dart between carts, laughing and yelling with the speed and volume of caffeinated sparrows. The city doesn't wake you up. It grabs your tunic, yells in your face, and dares you to survive the day. Now you stumble into the central room, hungry but not optimistic. Breakfast in ancient Rome isn't a meal, it's a polite suggestion. For the wealthy, it might be a collection of small indulgences. Bread with honey, a few olives, maybe cheese, dried fruit. Things your uncle insists are elegant because he never actually works. The slaves present it without much ceremony, and you can already tell they're bracing for you to complain. If you're poor, your morning meal is a different beast. It's bread. Just bread. Maybe so hard it could double as a self-defense weapon. If you're lucky, you soften it in diluted wine, which is the Roman equivalent of a life hack. Water, you see, has the charm of a suspicious pond. Romans, pragmatic and slightly paranoid, decided long ago that wine, cut with enough water to taste like watery regret, was safer. Your father is already deep in political discussion with no one in particular, grumbling about taxes, policies, or that one neighbor who glared at him 6 months ago. Your mother is mentally calculating how to stretch a handful of coins across laundry, prayers, groceries, and the full-time job of keeping you out of trouble. If you're rich, a servant stands nearby with your sandals, ready to help you put them on like you're a tiny emperor. If you're not, your mother hurls your shoes across the room with the accuracy of someone who's done this daily for a decade. Then, out you go, into the roar of Rome. The scent of warm bread, sour wine, and civic frustration follows you into the chaos. Street food hisses in pans, goats trot past like they own the road, someone is yelling about fish again, and a beggar is definitely arguing with that same pigeon. Your day has officially begun. And yes, Rome is still yelling. In ancient Rome, there was no gentle middle ground between childhood and adulthood. No teenage limbo filled with self-discovery or vague dreams about the future. One day, you're playing in the dust, your biggest concern being which sandals are least likely to break. The next, you're handed a toga and expected to behave like a seasoned senator. The transition is not symbolic, it's literal. The moment you don that great cumbersome wrap of fabric known as the toga virilis, the entire city begins to view you differently. You are, in the eyes of your family, your neighbors, and every disapproving elder in the forum, now a man. For boys, the ceremony is public. It's proud, ceremonial, and mildly humiliating. You stand in front of family members, beaming with expectations, your father's hand firm on your back, your mother already tearing up. But you're mostly concerned with not tripping over the miles of fabric threatening to swallow you alive. You clutch at the folds with all the confidence of a cat in a bath, and you know one misstep could make you the punchline of street gossip for the next 10 years. Rome doesn't forgive graceless entrances into adulthood. Girls, on the other hand, receive no such parade. The shift happens behind closed doors, but with even heavier consequences. One day you're arranging dolls made of clay and scraps. The next, your mother sits you down with a tone that says, "This is not a conversation. It's a briefing." Marriage is no longer a distant idea. It's the topic of the day. You're 13. And that means it's time to start preparing for your life as someone's wife, someone's mother, and someone's household manager. While modern teens might stress about social media and school exams, your worries now include dowries, cloth quality, and how to host dinner without accidentally insulting someone's family lineage. In Rome, you didn't get to discover who you were. You were told, if your father was a craftsman, you were expected to become one. If your family dealt in trade, your future would involve counting coins and managing inventories before you could fully count to 100. Your path was not a choice, it was a lineage, handed down like an heirloom whether you wanted it or not. Responsibility arrived early and in abundance. Boys were thrust into lessons on speech-making, public behavior, and how to carry themselves like small-scale senators, ready to one day run for real office or lead troops into battle. The girls were trained in silence and skill, how to maintain a household budget, direct servants, oversee religious rituals, and remain composed in public at all times. Especially important, avoiding scandal. In Rome, scandal had the staying power of marble. A single raised eyebrow could become a saga. Everything you did was evaluated: how you stood, how you ate, how you addressed a relative or responded to a compliment. Even your leisure was fair game. If you read books, that was admirable, provided they were the right books. If you played dice or lingered too long at the gladiator arena, that was already the beginning of your moral decline. Rome wasn't interested in letting you grow. It expected you to perform immediately, perfectly, and in full view of everyone. And then there was the toga itself. This wasn't just clothing. It was your uniform, your badge, and your burden. The first time you put it on, it feels like wrestling a curtain into submission. It drapes, folds, slips, and does its best to humiliate you in front of every neighbor and passing dog. You begin to understand why Roman statues always look like they're 2 seconds from giving up. The toga wraps you in symbolism, but it also wraps your legs together like a mischievous snake. One strong breeze and you're doing a street performance called Man versus Fabric. You'll lose. Spectacularly. Still, you wear it, because it announces to the world, I'm not a child anymore. I'm part of the machine now. The Roman world starts treating you differently, piling on expectations like bricks in an aqueduct. Your father starts bringing you to the forum, not to play or observe, but to learn how to speak, how to argue, how to endure political boredom without yawning out loud. Your education accelerates. You're expected to study law, memorize speeches, master philosophy, and understand the art of public flattery. And if you happen to humiliate yourself, don't worry. Someone will notice. Someone will always notice. School is not a refuge. It's an outdoor shouting match where the teacher recites lines from philosophers, while street vendors argue behind him about spoiled olives. You try to copy down Greek verses while dodging a stray dog gnawing on your writing tablet. You're not just learning grammar. You're training to survive rhetoric combat. Because in Rome, speaking well isn't a talent, it's a weapon. You debate everything, taxes, architecture, whether a friend's new sandals make him look ridiculous. Everything is an opportunity to sharpen your words. After school, you might trail your father through the forum, where chaos wears a toga and speeches are performed like theater. Senators gesticulate wildly. Merchants shout with the intensity of opera singers, and someone is always on the verge of a dramatic faint. Your father leans in and says, "This will be your world." And while you nod, all you can think is, "Please let me figure out this toga first." And while your education expands your mind, your body isn't left behind. You're expected to train, to develop discipline. You practice with wooden swords, spar with other boys, and march like a legionary in miniature. Rome doesn't raise poets who sit idly. It raises warriors who quote poetry between battles. Being a Roman teenager isn't about exploration. It's about execution. And Rome, the city, never blinks. It watches everything. From the moment you step outside your home to the way you adjust your tunic at the baths. There are no private mistakes, only public performances. If you're a Roman girl growing up in the empire, your life doesn't unfold like a scroll gently unrolling toward some tranquil destiny. It snaps into place with a jolt, like a door slammed shut by invisible hands. One moment, you're still a child, hands sticky with honey from stolen sweets and fingers tangled in doll hair made from yarn scraps. The next, your mother is standing over you with a woven basket of responsibilities and the words, "We need to talk about your future." And by future, she doesn't mean dreams or ambitions. She means marriage. Now. In ancient Rome, a girl's path was marked early and clearly, carved with the sharp edge of expectation. You wake before the sun because rest is a luxury and light is optional. Your morning begins with barking dogs, shouting vendors, the crash of pottery, again, and the relentless voice of your mother reminding you that adulthood isn't going to come tap politely on your shoulder. You have to meet it, head on, preferably with clean hands and properly arranged hair. Your tasks begin before your thoughts fully collect themselves. You stir thick wool in hot water, scrub tunics with the precision of a priest preparing a ritual, and haul laundry like Atlas with his globe. Roman clothing, made mostly of wool, isn't soft or cooperative. It clings, scratches, and requires so much effort to maintain that you begin to suspect it was designed by the gods as a test of character. Your hands become red from washing, your arms ache from wringing, and somewhere between the fumes of wet fabric and the scolding from your grandmother, you wonder if anyone's ever invented a machine to do this. If your family is wealthy, your life is structured with polish and protocol. You don't do the labor yourself. You oversee it. You supervise slaves with the sharp eyes your mother taught you to cultivate, manage the kitchen as if preparing a royal banquet even for a simple lunch, and learn how to calculate household expenses down to the last olive. You watch your mother navigate conversations with guests, adjusting her smile and tone like a musician tuning an instrument. The expectations are enormous but invisible. You're expected to look effortless while juggling the entire operation of a Roman home. And then there are the dinners. If your family hosts guests, these become performances. You're taught how to arrange cushions just so, how to correct a seating plan without making anyone feel insulted, and how to compliment someone's tunic while calculating their family's social worth in your head. You become fluent in silent judgment, in knowing how to say everything without saying anything. Your mother is your commander. You are her apprentice. Her greatest lesson is this: avoid scandal at all costs. In Rome, scandal spreads faster than fire and burns just as hot. But if your family is poor, the demands are heavier, messier, louder. You don't supervise, you work. You help run a market stall, negotiating prices with men who assume they're clever, carrying baskets heavier than you, chasing runaway goats that seem determined to shame you in public. You're responsible for siblings who keep threatening to burn down the apartment with nothing more than clumsiness and unfiltered enthusiasm. You cook, clean, shop, bargain, haul, and mediate. And somehow, amidst this blur of labor and survival, you're supposed to be preparing for marriage. By your early teens, sometimes 13, sometimes 14, your parents are already evaluating potential husbands the way one might inspect a horse. Wealth is ideal. Respectable family is non-negotiable. Bad breath is unfortunate but survivable. Love? That's not a requirement. That's a luxury, like scented oil or imported silk. Most girls in Rome don't expect romance. They expect duty. They expect to be handed from father to husband like a household key. Still, your mother gives you more than rules. She gives you strategy. She teaches you how to stretch a budget so tightly it sings, how to manage the moods of a household with a smile that looks sweet but never falters, how to run everything in silence while letting the man of the house believe he's in charge. She teaches you how to nod at gossip without repeating it, how to catch scandal before it lands on your doorstep, how to survive in a city where a woman's mistakes echo louder than her achievements. And even though you're only 13, your life is already full of motion, sound, pressure. You don't get time to mature slowly, to find yourself. Rome has already decided who you are. You're not a child anymore. You're a Roman woman in training, and your training has no end. Every day is preparation for a life that will ask everything from you, often without saying thank you. You walk through Rome not as a girl, but as someone being watched, judged, shaped. The city doesn't care how you feel about that. It only cares that you're ready. Education in ancient Rome was not a serene experience of polished marble halls, quiet contemplation, and respectful whispers. It was nothing like the quiet, orderly classrooms some might imagine today. Instead, it was an open-air performance in the middle of life's ongoing chaos. Picture trying to study philosophy while a fishmonger yells about trout 2 feet away and a stray dog absconds with someone's writing tablet. School began when you arrived at the ludus. Not a grand institution, but often just a shaded spot near a market or the edge of a busy street. Your teacher, the literator, sat at the center of this educational whirlwind, usually with the weary, unfocused gaze of someone who asked the gods for wisdom and got assigned teenagers instead. Around him gathered the students, each gripping a wax tablet and stylus like warriors preparing for battle, which in a way they were. The street didn't quiet down for learning. Rome didn't make exceptions for education. Instead, learning happened through the noise, through the stampede of carts, the squawks of chickens, and the eternal arguments of merchants. Your classmates weren't much better. Some paid attention, others fidgeted like they had fleas, and a few spent most of the lesson trying to carve pictures into their tablets that definitely weren't letters. Lessons covered reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, but with a twist. You were learning two languages at once. Latin, the language of your people, and Greek, the language of culture, philosophy, and many of the most important texts. This dual curriculum meant that your brain was constantly juggling alphabets, pronunciations, and grammatical rules that didn't always agree with each other. Confused. Good. That meant you were learning. And just when you began to feel like you were getting the hang of things, your teacher would introduce rhetoric. Rhetoric, the lifeblood of Roman education, the art of argument, the joy of saying something clever, loud, and persuasive enough to win admiration, respect, and hopefully political power later. You began small, with simple introductions and recitations, but the goal was always grand. To one day stand in the forum, declaiming your ideas like Cicero while the crowd held its breath. Your teacher didn't tolerate half-hearted attempts. Each line of poetry, each argument, each sentence had to be delivered with enough passion to move the heavens, or at least impress the baker watching from across the street. Meanwhile, distractions buzzed around you. Dogs barked, vendors shouted, someone dropped a jug for the third time that morning, and the scent of bread kept reminding you that lunch was hours away. But you persisted because Rome demanded it. If your family had money, you didn't stop at the literata. You graduated to the grammaticus, a more advanced teacher who introduced you to Greek literature, Roman history, mathematics, and the terrifying intricacies of grammar. Not just good grammar, but the kind that could impress aristocrats and avoid being slapped by the ghost of Cicero. These teachers were stricter, more elite, and often had a favorite disciplinary method: a stick. And the stick usually had a name. Not as a threat, but as a friend. A companion in correcting youthful rebellion. Still, the most frightening part wasn't the stick. It was the constant reminder that one day you were expected to represent your household, your family, your city, with poise, intelligence, and eloquence. Every mispronounced word, every grammatical slip, every awkward pause was a moment your ancestors could frown upon from their marble busts. And the stakes were high. Education wasn't for your amusement. It was your training ground for survival in public life. In Rome, every man was an actor on a stage. Every woman a curator of household theater. School wasn't about dreaming. It was about drilling. Drilling confidence, clarity, and control into every phrase you spoke. There were no inspirational posters, no supportive guidance counselors, only expectations, only the endless pressure to become a Roman worth listening to. By the time you're deep into your teenage years in ancient Rome, the city has already delivered its verdict. You're not a work in progress. You're a functioning unit, not someone becoming something, someone who already is. There's no room to figure things out slowly. Rome doesn't wait for self-discovery. It assigns you your purpose like a general assigning ranks. And you follow orders, because in Rome, to resist responsibility is to disappoint not just your family, but the ancestors watching from the walls, the gods watching from the sky, and your neighbors watching from every doorway. If you're from a modest or poor family, your day is less a series of events and more a marathon of obligations. There's no clean your room lecture. It's assumed that your room is already full of sleeping siblings and piles of things that need hauling. You're scrubbing floors with water fetched from a fountain 4 streets away, not because it's noble, but because no one else is going to do it. You're cutting vegetables, feeding animals, sweeping dust that immediately returns with reinforcements. You're shaking rugs out over the balcony while coughing on the storm of filth you've just unleashed on the street and probably on someone's laundry below. Laundry, in fact, deserves its own genre of suffering. In Rome, doing laundry is like waging war with fabric. The clothes are soaked in tubs, sometimes with substances better left unmentioned, stomped on, scrubbed, twisted, and laid out to dry in a way that involves every relative yelling their own personal laundry philosophy. And when you think you're finished, your mother appears holding another basket like a minor goddess of domestic dissatisfaction. You don't sigh, you just keep going. Because that's Rome. If you're a boy, chances are you're apprenticed somewhere. Maybe with a blacksmith, where the forge belches smoke and the man you work under speaks mostly in growls and hammer strikes. Your job is to carry things, get burned occasionally, and not break anything that matters. Or you might be learning pottery, lifting heavy clay, sweating in a shop that smells like damp earth and nerves, all while your teacher lectures you in mutters about craftsmanship and patience. You nod like you understand. You don't, not yet, but you learn. Girls are apprenticed too, but not in workshops. Their domain is the home. Their mentor is their mother. Weaving, spinning, managing food stores, counting coins and handling guests. Roman women weren't idle ornaments. They were household generals. And your mother is determined to make you one too. She corrects your mistakes before you make them, teaches you to smile at a guest while calculating whether the olives will last another week. She reminds you that a single misstep, social, financial, or moral, can stain a reputation faster than spilled wine on a white tunic. If you're from a wealthy family, your life isn't exactly easy. It's just dressed up with nicer sandals. You supervise slaves instead of doing the work yourself, but supervision in Rome is a full-time job. You must observe with stern precision. You must nod at appropriate times, make corrections with tact, and somehow be everywhere at once. If you're especially privileged, you also receive lessons in etiquette. How to stand without slouching, how to greet senators, how to pass a wine cup without committing a diplomatic error. You're trained not just to perform, but to convince the world that your performance is effortless. Rome expects contribution from everyone. Whether you sleep on silk or straw, whether your sandals are gold-laced or made of scraps, you're part of the machine. There is no idle youth. There is only early adulthood. At 13 or 14, you're not preparing for your adult life. You're already in it. Rome has no patience for late bloomers. You're expected to be useful, to serve, to function, and do it with dignity. But somehow, despite all this, Roman teenagers find space for something else too. A life of their own. Social lives flare through the city like secret comets. They're loud, they're messy, they're entirely unapproved. You find your tribe in the chaos, cousins, neighbors, classmates, that boy who once tripped into a fountain and blamed the dog, that girl who can out-bargain her own father. These are your people. Together, you storm the streets like miniature legions of laughter and mayhem. Rome is your jungle gym, though it's built more like an obstacle course designed by vengeful gods. You dodge carts, leap over puddles of who knows what, and weave between goats like they're part of a festival procession. You gather in the market, at the baker's stall, outside the baths. You eat whatever you can afford. Bread, olives, salted snacks. Because food is both fuel and excuse to linger. You argue about gladiators. You gossip about senators. You whisper about who was seen talking to whom. You laugh too loudly. You stay out too long. You make Rome yours, for a little while. Because even in a city that demands you grow up too fast, friendship still finds a way to be young. Fashion in ancient Rome was not about comfort. It was a performance. A daily struggle between fabric, gravity, and your desire not to look ridiculous in front of judgmental strangers. For a Roman teenager, getting dressed wasn't a simple task. It was an act of endurance. And your clothing wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol, a signal, and a challenge sent by the gods. If you're a boy, your routine begins simply enough. You put on your tunic, loose and lightweight. But then comes the real ordeal, the toga virilis to be exact. A vast, dramatic swirl of cloth that drapes, folds, slips, and somehow manages to make you feel both powerful and entirely helpless at once. This isn't just clothing. It's a test, a rite of passage disguised as formal wear. You wrap, tuck, and twist the fabric until you're reasonably sure it's secure. It never is. Stepping outside becomes a hazard course. One breeze and the toga flutters like a flag of surrender. One wrong step and you're tangled in folds that seem to multiply as you walk. You try to project dignity, but end up staggering down the street like you're fighting an invisible octopus. Senators have assistants to adjust their garments every few minutes. You have your own two hands, which are currently tangled somewhere between your hip and your pride. Girls have their own fashion gauntlet. They wear the stola, a long, graceful garment meant to convey modesty and elegance. It drapes beautifully in theory. In practice, it catches on every piece of furniture, every passing cart, every goat that brushes too close. Over the stola is the palla, a cloak that's equal parts garment and obstacle. You try to hold it in place, but it has its own ideas. And that's before you even attempt to walk. Hair becomes another battlefield. Styles are elaborate, intricate braids, coils, and pins that require the patience of a saint and the assistance of someone with steady hands and nerves of steel. You twist, pin, and pray. And after all that work, one gust of wind or a child throwing a fig, and your hairstyle collapses like a poorly built temple. Accessories matter too. Jewelry isn't optional. It's identity. Rich families display their wealth with glass beads, gold earrings, and bronze brooches. If you're poor, you wear bone or clay, maybe a lucky charm your uncle swore was traded for 3 loaves of bread and a blessing from a traveling merchant. You hope it's not cursed. You wear it anyway. And then there are the sandals. Simple in concept, wildly uncooperative in reality. They break at the worst times. Crossing the forum, walking into a temple, stepping into something you pray wasn't alive a moment ago. The straps wear thin, the soles slip, and no one seems to care if your dignity goes with them. But fashion in Rome isn't just about looking good. It's about making statements. Clothing tells the city who you are, who your family is, and how seriously you should be taken. Too plain? People think you're trying to hide something. Too elaborate? They wonder who you're trying to impress. Wear your toga wrong. That's a scandal. Let it drag on the ground. You've just insulted your ancestors. Everyone is watching. Everyone is judging. Rome is one enormous stage, and you're never out of the spotlight. Clothing doesn't just cover you, it exposes you. Your fabric, your jewelry, your sandals, even the way you walk, they all whisper messages to the city, and the city never stops listening. So you pull your toga higher, adjust the pin in your hair, and take a deep breath. You're dressed for Rome. Now you just have to survive it. Stepping out into the streets of ancient Rome isn't like strolling down a peaceful lane. It's like being thrown into the middle of a living, breathing storm. The city is not quiet. It does not tiptoe. It does not pause to let you catch your breath. From the moment your sandals touch the ground outside your home, Rome assaults your senses like a military campaign. The noise hits first. It rises from every direction, a full orchestra of daily life performed with no conductor and no concern for volume. Vendors shout as if trying to outdo the gods. Fresh fruit, fresh fish, fresh everything, even if it's been out since yesterday. Carpenters hammer, blacksmiths clang, dogs bark, and every third person is involved in a loud argument, often with someone who isn't even listening. A man lectures a chicken. A woman screams at a passing cart. Somewhere, a child is crying for no apparent reason while another one is laughing like he started the fire and doesn't regret it. Then the smell arrives. Rome doesn't have a single scent. It has dozens. They swirl together, crash into each other, and cling to your tunic long after you've gone home. You get the sweet pull of warm bread baking in clay ovens, the earthy sharpness of olive oil, the incense wafting from a nearby temple. But those are quickly chased by less romantic aromas. Sweat, smoke, the sour tang of wine spilled on hot stone, and the unmistakable whiff of something that was dumped out of a window not 10 minutes ago. Every breath is an adventure. Every corner holds a new olfactory mystery. Navigating the streets is not a simple matter of walking in a straight line. Rome doesn't allow that. The roads are stone-paved but uneven. Carts creak by, pulled by animals with no interest in yielding to pedestrians. You dodge wheels, leap over puddles of unknown origin, sidestep beggars who lurch into your path, and swerve to avoid street performers who've decided that juggling knives next to a vegetable stand is the height of culture. Shops line the roads like tiny open-fronted theaters, each one shouting its own performance. Bakers pull loaves from blazing ovens while yelling prices to passers-by. Butchers wave cleavers at flies and customers alike. Barbers shave beards in full public view, chatting with clients while children race past them shrieking. Tavern keepers lean in their doorways, promising wine that definitely won't kill you this time. Probably. And then there are the performers. Musicians strum stringed instruments with wild flair. Poets declaim verses about love, war, and the tragic destiny of garlic. Acrobats spin through the air in feats that defy reason and occasionally gravity. Some are talented. Some are very much not. But all are loud, and all demand your attention whether you offer it or not. Chariot traffic is its own kind of nightmare. If you hear wheels behind you, move. Fast. Roman drivers operate under 2 rules. Go fast and never stop. They treat pedestrians as suggestions. Teenagers dive out of the way, then laugh like they weren't just moments from becoming a footnote in someone else's heroic tale. Rome doesn't hand out warnings. It hands out bruises. And among it all, soldiers patrol. They walk with precision, armor gleaming, eyes sharp. They don't smile. They don't talk. They scan the crowd like they're evaluating every soul for signs of rebellion. Their presence is a constant reminder. This city, wild and untamed as it seems, is still part of an empire built on discipline. But despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the streets pulse with energy. They're unpredictable, messy, and slightly dangerous, but they're alive. You feel it in the ground, in the air, in the way your heart beats a little faster every time you turn a corner. As a teenager, these streets are your world, your battleground, your playground. They belong to you, and you belong to them. And so you dive into the madness, weaving through the crowd with practiced steps, adjusting your toga or palla as needed, keeping your eyes alert and your sandals steady. Because in Rome, the city doesn't slow down for anyone. It expects you to keep up. If there's one thing Roman teenagers adore, more than avoiding chores, it's a festival. And lucky for them, Rome has no shortage of those. The city celebrates everything, from gods and harvests to victories, seasons, and stories older than the stones beneath their feet. To outsiders, it might seem like religious devotion or civic pride. But to Roman teens, it's the best excuse in the world to yell, dance, stay out late, and maybe, just maybe, get away with something scandalous. The festivals come often, loud and unpredictable, like surprise parties thrown by the gods themselves. Each one explodes into the streets with its own flavors, sounds, and rule-breaking opportunities. The biggest of them all? Saturnalia. For a glorious, chaotic week in December, the empire flips itself upside down. Masters serve slaves. Roles reverse. Gifts are exchanged. Laws bend like reeds in the wind. Teenagers dress in bright clothes and run through the streets howling like wild animals freed from their cages. You eat until you're dizzy, laugh until your ribs ache, and gamble openly without shame. Even the adults join in, half-heartedly pretending they don't enjoy it as much as you do. Then there's Lupercalia. If Saturnalia is cheerful madness, Lupercalia is just madness. Priests strip down and jog through the streets whipping people, yes, with actual strips of goat hide. Why? For fertility, supposedly. Teenagers don't pretend to understand the logic. They just gather in crowds to watch and scream-laugh like it's the funniest spectacle in the empire. And somewhere in the mix, there's awkward flirting, exaggerated courage, and someone tripping over a fruit cart. Spring brings Florialia, a gentler celebration filled with flowers, performances, and enough theatrical flair to make even the grumpiest senators raise an eyebrow. Girls love it for the fashion. Draped robes, bright colors, delicate garlands. Boys pretend they don't care, but absolutely do. Music fills the air. Dancers twirl like petals in the breeze, and everywhere you look, someone's trying to impress someone else with poetry they barely rehearsed.
But festivals aren't just about tradition. They're about freedom. You walk through the city arm in arm with your friends, munching on honey cakes, roasted chickpeas, and figs so ripe they practically melt in your mouth. Street magicians try to cheat you. You let them. Musicians perform songs that are slightly off-key but full of spirit. Acrobats fly through the air while your mother mutters that one day they'll break their necks. And you're simply alive, surrounded by color, laughter, and the sense that, for once, the weight of Rome has lifted off your shoulders. Still, the festivals are only part of the entertainment menu. There are other thrills waiting just beyond the temples and markets. The Colosseum calls like a distant drumbeat. Teenagers sneak away to watch gladiators train, muscle-bound warriors moving through practice routines with the grace of dancers and the violence of wolves. You claim you're there to observe strategy, but no one believes you, least of all yourself. The noise, the movement, the spectacle, it's intoxicating. And then there's the Circus Maximus, the grand arena of chariot racing. Think of it as the Roman version of your wildest sport, except faster, louder, and far more dangerous. Teams are picked with near-religious loyalty. Teenagers paint symbols on their sandals, wear colors like banners, and shout themselves hoarse as horses thunder past in blurs of speed and dust. Victories are personal, losses feel like betrayal, fights break out, friendships are tested. It's beautiful. These events aren't distractions. They're release valves. In a world where responsibility lands on your shoulders before your voice finishes changing, where you're expected to walk like an adult and talk like a senator, these moments are where you breathe, where you laugh, where you remember that beneath the layers of expectation and tradition, you're still young. Festivals, games, races, spectacles, they aren't just pastimes. They're proof that even in an empire built on duty, there's room for joy. And Roman teenagers seize every second of it. If you imagine Roman bathhouses as quiet sanctuaries of peace, places where people soak in silence, hum lightly, and reflect on philosophy, never been to one, especially not with teenagers inside. The baths in ancient Rome are less like a spa and more like a public gym, cafe, locker room, debate stage, and comedy club, all stacked into one noisy, steamy, chaotic temple of hygiene and gossip. And for a Roman teenager, it's the only place that feels like neutral territory. You don't say, "Let's hang out later." You say, "Meet me at the baths." Because where else would you go? The streets are dangerous. Your house is full of work. The forum is crawling with opinionated adults, but the baths, they belong to you. Entry is cheap. Even if your coin purse is light, you save up just enough to get through the doors. And once inside, you're immediately smacked in the face with a wall of heat and human noise. Every room echoes with splashes, laughter, political arguments, and the occasional overconfident teenager pretending they know more than they do. It's not a quiet place, but it is a shared place. A space where the city's sharp edges melt into steam and where everyone, rich or poor, strips down to nothing but their towel and their stories. You begin in the apoditerium, the changing room. You stash your clothes in a cubby and mutter a quiet prayer that no one steals them while you're inside. Theft isn't encouraged, but it happens. The attendants do their best, but Rome is full of people who believe that if they get caught, they were just unlucky, not wrong. From there, you wander into the warm room, the tepidarium, where the air is thick and soothing and your body begins to relax. It's the calm before the storm, because after that comes the caldarium, the hot room. The temperature rises like a challenge. You step into the steam and your vision disappears. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but you can definitely hear a senator complaining about tax reforms and two teenage boys trying to out-gossip each other about which gladiator has the best abs. You sweat. A lot. Your hair curls into chaos. Your skin shines. Your mind swims. And through it all, you whisper jokes, spread rumors, and learn things you're not supposed to know. This is where secrets are traded, where opinions are formed, where reputations are inflated or quietly destroyed. Then comes the plunge, the frigidarium, the cold bath. It looks like still water, but it might as well be the edge of the underworld. You jump in, you scream inside, you pretend to be calm. Your friends laugh at you while pretending they weren't just as shocked. It's not just cleansing, it's a ritual. It's proof that you've survived the heat and come out the other side. Between rooms, you eat snacks, nuts, figs, maybe bread if you're lucky. You flirt if you're brave. You complain about your teacher, your chores, your mother, your sandals. You make fun of a friend's hair. You pretend not to stare at someone who's pretending not to stare at you. You linger by the wall with the carved graffiti of gladiators and try to act older than you are. Because for a little while, in the haze of heat and noise, you're not a child, and you're not yet an adult. You're something in between. A Roman teenager surrounded by your people, your peers, your little chaotic tribe. And here in the bathhouse, you're not judged by your family or your status, just by your ability to tell a good story and survive the cold plunge without shrieking. The baths are more than hygiene. They're therapy. They're rehearsal for adulthood. They're a place where you're allowed to exist without performing for the entire city. And in Rome, that kind of freedom is rare, so you savor it. Steam, laughter, and all. In ancient Rome, family expectations weren't gentle reminders. They were carved in marble and delivered like laws. Being a teenager in this world didn't mean exploration. It meant duty. You were not encouraged to ask, "Who do I want to become?" That was already decided for you. You were told, often and loudly, what was expected, and those expectations arrived not with suggestions but with the full weight of legacy, reputation, and centuries of tradition pressing down on your shoulders. If you were a boy, the message came early and often. Your father would sit you down, not for a tender heart-to-heart, but for the Roman version of a marching order. He wouldn't ask how you felt about your future. He'd explain it to you with all the warmth of a military inspection. You must honor the family, train your mind, train your body, speak clearly, walk upright, greet your elders, do not slouch, the neighbors are watching. Always the neighbors. In Rome, your reputation wasn't yours. It belonged to your household. Every action reflected on the family name. Every stumble was not just your failure, it was a stain on generations. Your mother didn't contradict this. She nodded from the side, arms crossed, mentally scripting your political career as if it were a play already written. She reminded you to behave like a miniature statesman in every setting. Even eating had rules. Even breathing had posture. And if you were a girl, the pressure wasn't less. It was simply different, quieter perhaps, but no less suffocating. Your mother didn't raise you gently. She trained you like a commander preparing her lieutenant. You learned to manage a household before you learned to fully understand what freedom even meant. You learned how to organize storerooms, direct servants, preserve the olive oil, manage guests, and stretch the household budget so tightly it might snap. You were the invisible spine of the family, expected to hold everything together while never appearing like you were doing anything at all. Marriage wasn't a someday fantasy. It was a strategy already in motion. Conversations about potential husbands started before you fully understood what being a wife would even mean. Compatibility wasn't the priority. Respectability was. Does his family have influence? Are the rumors about him manageable? Is the dowry fair? That's what your parents asked each other while you sat nearby, silent, polite, and internally screaming. Discipline wasn't suggested, it was demanded. Modesty wasn't advised, it was mandatory. Achievement was expected not as a sign of personal success, but as a tribute to your lineage. Rebellion wasn't a phase. It was a threat to household stability. And while every teenager in every era feels misunderstood, Roman teens knew better than to shout about it. Because in Rome, rebellion didn't lead to a scolding. It led to hours of lecture about ancestors, Jupiter, civic responsibility, and how your poor choices might offend the gods and trigger a drought. You couldn't roll your eyes at your father without risking a lecture that started with, "In the time of Romulus," and ended 3 hours later with a moral lesson carved into your soul. You couldn't argue with your mother unless you wanted to be reminded that women like Lucretia built the moral foundation of Rome with their virtue, and that your current attitude was a disgrace to her memory. Rome didn't raise teenagers with leniency. It forged them with pressure, with repetition, with surveillance. Your actions were never just your own. They were public, they were watched, they were weighed. Every alley could echo with gossip. Every glance could be misinterpreted. Every mistake had witnesses. Your behavior wasn't just about you. It was about the ancestors behind you and the future generations ahead. So you straightened your tunic, nodded at the passing elder, and tried your best not to trip on your own ambition. Because Rome wasn't just molding citizens. It was crafting legacies, and yours had already begun. For all its formality, its laws and lectures and obsession with discipline, ancient Rome was still a city of beating hearts and tangled emotions. And nothing tangled the heart more than love, especially teenage love. The chaotic, inconvenient kind that sweeps you off your feet while your parents are trying to marry you off to someone who smells like anchovies and ambition. Falling in love in Rome was less about romance and more about survival. Survival of feelings you weren't supposed to have. Survival of glances that meant too much. Survival of the rumors that could ruin everything. If you were a Roman teenager, love wasn't a leisurely stroll through a garden. It was a sprint through a crowded marketplace while wearing a toga that kept slipping off your shoulder. It arrived without warning, usually in the form of a glimpse, someone across the forum adjusting their toga with an elegance that felt divinely choreographed. Or someone at the baths, their hair still damp and curling in the heat, catching the light just right. And suddenly that was it. The gods had spoken. Your heart decided this was the one. Never mind that you hadn't exchanged a single word. Your friends were no help. They cheered you on, armed with advice that ranged from questionable to downright disastrous. Write a poem, they said. Pretend to get lost and ask for directions, even if you'd lived in this neighborhood since birth. Stand near them, just near. Ancient Roman teenagers invented awkward flirting long before the internet ever had the chance. If you were a boy, you tried to impress with subtlety, which often failed. You lingered where your crush might pass by. You stood straighter. You laughed louder at your friends' jokes. You quoted a line of Ovid that you hoped sounded romantic, but may have been about fish. You gestured dramatically in conversations they weren't even part of, pretending your toga wasn't strangling you like a disapproving ant. If you were a girl, the dance was more delicate. You couldn't approach. That would be unthinkable, scandalous. So you mastered the art of the sideways glance, the flicker of a smile, the pause that wasn't really a pause. You passed each other at the market, eyes sliding past like ships in the mist, but both of you were navigating. Both of you were watching. Love letters existed, but they weren't passed in secret under desks. They were etched into wax tablets, with trembling hands and hearts full of hope. You wrote lines like, "Your gaze scorches like Vesta's flame," and prayed your mother didn't find it. If she did, prepare for a lecture that began with the sanctity of the household and ended somewhere in the moral decay of Carthage. Gossip, of course, was the real threat. Rome was built on walls, and those walls had ears. Tell one friend, and by sundown half the neighborhood had an opinion. Everyone had theories. Everyone had warnings. Everyone had a cousin who once ruined their future with a poorly timed crush. Senators gossiped. Shopkeepers gossiped. Even the pigeons probably had informed opinions. And yet love survived. In glances. In brief moments in the crowd. In messages scratched into clay tiles. In daydreams during rhetoric lessons. Despite the restrictions, the rules, the constant presence of chaperones and suspicious uncles, Roman teenagers still found ways to feel everything deeply. They still found ways to want something bigger than the marriage contracts waiting at home. Because love in ancient Rome wasn't just an emotion. It was rebellion. It was longing. It was drama. It was hope whispered into the chaos. It might be impossible, impractical, or entirely foolish, but that didn't matter. You loved anyway, loudly in your silence, boldly in your caution, and always, always under the watchful gaze of a city that never stopped talking. By the time you reach the end of your teenage years in ancient Rome, there's no ceremony, no dramatic farewell to youth. Because the truth is, Rome never really let you be young in the first place. You were handed responsibility before your voice finished changing, before your back stopped aching from your growth spurts. Now, Rome simply tightens the grip, the expectations sharpen, the curtain rises, and you are expected to perform as if you've been ready your entire life. If you're a boy, adulthood doesn't arrive gently. It arrives with a thud. One day, your father pulls you into the forum, where senators, magistrates, and merchants circle like eagles over fresh ambition. You're introduced to powerful men whose names you've heard since childhood. They shake your hand. They offer advice you didn't ask for. One of them squeezes your shoulder and says, "Uphold Roman values," as if the weight of the empire now rests on your newly polished sandals. You nod because nodding is safe. But inside, you're still afraid of folding your toga wrong. Your path spreads out like a mosaic, but each tile has already been carved. Politics, law, military command, or the family business. Whichever route you take, Rome expects more than competence. It expects perfection. You must honor the ancestors. You must keep the family name free of scandal. You must marry well, make money, gain influence. And of course, one day produce heirs who will carry the same burden you now shoulder. No pressure. If you're a girl, adulthood hits harder. There is no easing into it. You go from daughter to matron almost overnight. One day you're helping your mother with the household accounts. The next, you are the household. You run a home with the precision of a military campaign, supervising servants, managing the family's social standing, preparing meals, keeping rituals, storing grain, keeping track of the wine, the cloth, the guests, the expenses. And you do it all while smiling, while graciously receiving people you'd rather toss into the Tiber. Marriage, by now, isn't some dreamy unknown. It's a structure you've been taught to navigate. It's not a fairy tale. It's an alliance, a strategy, a test of survival. Your parents have chosen carefully. The man may be older. He may be boring. He may talk too much about coinage, but he is politically safe, respectable, and now he's your new world. You step into his household and make it run. Not for glory, for stability. Everyone watches you. Everyone judges. You are expected to glide through disaster, charm away family drama, avoid offense at every feast, and never, ever let the olive oil run out. Your skills are invisible until they fail. Your value is measured not in coin, but in quiet, efficient competence. But here's the surprising thing. You rise to meet it. Despite the impossible weight, the endless expectations, the stares, the rules, the lectures, and the silent pressure that feels like a second skin, you rise. Because that's what Rome does. It doesn't coddle. It doesn't wait. It shapes you. It throws you into the fire and dares you to become something more. You've learned how to argue in chaos, how to survive in crowds, how to carry yourself in front of elders and how to joke with friends behind the wine stalls. You've trained your mind. You've tested your body. You've memorized the laws. You've bent without breaking. And now Rome calls you forward. Not as a child, not as a learner, as a Roman. You walk into the forum, into the marketplace, into your marriage, your duty, your legacy, not as someone who hopes to be ready, but as someone who knows they've already begun. The city roars around you, and you walk with it.